condition or a substance use disorder, or for your loved one that has one. So before we get started, I'm just going to remind everyone to please stay muted. And we're going to have an opportunity for you to submit questions to the panelists. But the way we're going to do that is going to be, if you would like to ask a question, can you send it to me personally? That way we can organize and triage them. And some of the things that you're going to hear are going to be kind of sensitive. It's a vulnerable conversation. So if you feel like you need to take a break or step out of the room, please do so. And following the presentation, we're going to send out some resources and some more information about our Stigma-Free campaign. So I think that's all I have for house rules. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with our presentation. But thank you guys again. I'm so excited.
You have your phone if Greco calls? Where is it?
Okay. So this is our Stigma-Free Somerset County initiative. Basically, it is a campaign made up of people with lived experiences, with providers, professionals, and caregivers. So the purpose is to reduce stigma that's related to mental health and substance use, and to encourage treatment and more community cohesion. So in order for us to reduce stigma, we have to understand what stigma is. So to stigmatize somebody is to discriminate against them or to treat them unfairly. It's often label-based and stereotype-driven. And we know that stereotypes are usually very negative and one-dimensional in nature. They kind of put you in a box and they kind of say, this is all you are, and this is the only way I'll think of you. And just for an example, what comes to mind when you think of mental health or substance use? It can be a positive thing, it could be a negative thing, but those stereotypes are what our conceptions are. So we, as a committee, work to try to reduce the negativity and spread a little bit more education and awareness. So in order to understand mental health conditions and diagnostic criteria, we first have to look at what mental health is, because we all have it, just like we all have physical health. So our mental health and our wellness, it describes us as a whole person, and what prevents us or allows us to have happy, successful, and healthy lives. So I know you've probably heard somebody say mind-body connection, or even mind-body-soul connection, but I like to look at the 8 dimensions of wellness to kind of get a better understanding that it's your whole person that can be affected, and that's important in your mental health journey. So for example, right now during coronavirus, I'm sure there are so many aspects of this wheel. If you're looking at it just for yourself, you can recognize the changes that have happened. Since coronavirus, since maybe you're working from home, or you're not able to, or your environment's changed, or you're not able to see loved ones, and your social aspect has changed, or even your occupation has changed, whether some people have lost their jobs or they've really had a whole different way of working. So if we look at these different aspects of wellness, it's easier to understand how mental health is so broad and how we all experience it, because we're all affected by our mental, our physical, our emotional, our social, and on. So in order to understand diagnosis criteria, all of that stuff, we have to be able to differentiate between what is a normal human reaction and what is a diagnostic disorder or condition. So if we're looking back at that, the dimension wheel that I just showed, obviously that can be impacting and moving constantly. So these feelings of anxiety, stress, depression, or feeling lost, I'm sure everybody has experienced one, if not all of them, and could be experiencing them now. But the difference between what is just being alive and being human versus a condition is when these feelings are no longer temporary and manageable. If you can't get out of bed after 5 months, that's not temporary and that's not manageable, just for an example. But if we were to look at a condition, a mental health or a substance use condition, they're usually marked and defined. Unfortunately, it's kind of negative, but it looks at your quality of life, your ability to function and get through the day. And that's really how the criteria is diagnosed, and that's how we look at a condition. You probably hear the term mental illness a lot. I tend not to say it just because of that negative connotation that you're sick and there's something wrong with you that needs to be fixed. But if we call it a condition, everybody has a condition, whether it's physical, something. It's conditional, it changes, and it's subjective. So that is less of a death sentence and more of an experience. But diagnoses are based on sometimes the duration, like the example of not being able to get out of bed. If that's 5 months, we're looking at something more severe. So the severity is in a few different aspects. Are you able to hold a job? Are you able to have safe housing? And are you able to have friendships, romantic relationships? How bad is your symptomology, and how present and how constant is it in your daily life? And lastly, we also look at your insight and your self-awareness. Your ability to look at your thoughts, behaviors, and decisions says a lot about your own mental health or substance use disorder. And if you are more on the self-aware side, more than likely your severity will be a little bit lesser too. So if we look at mental health and substance use disorders, there are some common ones, and these are probably some of the more familiar ones just in greater society. So depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and PTSD. And the reason that substance use disorder is included, for an example, opiate use disorder, is because we know that these are often co-occurring. That's a term that we use. That just means they exist concurrently. So you could have a mental health and a substance use disorder at the same time. And more chances than not, you probably have at least some aspects from both sides, more of a Venn diagram than two different silos. And we have different studies that say that looks like 75% or more of treatment cases. So the odds are that in some point in your life, either you or somebody you know will have a mental health or a substance use disorder. So if it's not you and if it's not your loved one, it's probably in your circle still, in your coworkers, or in your own life somewhere. And at least 20% of our population is living with a diagnosable disorder. So that doesn't mean that 20% of the entire population has a diagnosis or is in treatment or recovery. It just means that if you look at any given year and kind of take a snapshot, 1 in 5 people will have enough of that symptomology that we discussed before that you could actually have a diagnosis. So that means that you can relate to everything I'm talking about. And that equates really to about 67,000 residents. So that doesn't mean that there's 67,000 people in treatment or recovery. That it just means that this is present, and it's really everywhere and all around us. So these stereotypes about people with mental health or substance use conditions being just locked up in insane asylums or on the street homeless, those are stereotypes. So while there is reality, we do have mental facilities, we do have psychiatric hospitals and rehabs. That's not the only way that mental health looks, and that's not the only experience that there is. Okay, so if we look at that, then the next thing we have to analyze is who is actually getting treatment. So there is a study that shows that 50% of all conditions onset by age 14. So what that means is approximately 50% of somebody who has a diagnosis or a condition has seen some of that symptomology come out by the time they were 14. So this, I think, relates to the statistic of most seeking treatment 10 years later, because if you're a child or a young adolescent, you might not understand what's happening with you. You might be scared to reach out to somebody, or you don't want to be treated differently. And a lot of that in the younger population, it just might be associated with your developmental status. So there is a lot of confusion here. But as we know, still adults who aren't seeking treatment, there is a high level of stigma of being treated differently or coded as violent or not as intelligent or whatever stereotypes that there are, because there are plenty. So if that is just kind of a blanket statement of all of society, we have to look at our different populations too. So we know that people of color will face more stigma, and they are less likely to receive care. And when they do receive care, it's usually of poor quality. So just if we're looking at this chart right here, it's from 2018. So we see that Asian adults and Black adults are less likely to actually receive treatment. And whether that is because of a previous bad experience and a lack of cultural competency from their treatment provider, or if that is just a cultural perspective where religion and family is more important than seeking out a traditional psychotherapist. Or it could be a combination. I mean, everybody knows within their own cultures the perceptions of mental health and substance use. And that differs between cultures, but we do know that people of color are less likely to actually receive that normal, straightforward experience. And then we have to look at some other populations as well. So we know that the LGBT population, they have higher rates of co-occurring disorders versus the general public. So that 1 in 5 figure I was discussing before, it's more like 37% here. And that is not just because somebody is simply a member of the LGBT community, but it's really the stigmas that come along with it. So whether that's not being accepted by your family, or bullying, or we know there's higher levels of sexual assault within this community. And we also know that HIV and AIDS has an impact on this community as well. So if we're looking at just the things that this community experiences, there's going to be a higher toll that's taken on your mental health. Additionally, we're going to look at first responders, because we know the stereotypes of them. They're a 3 times higher risk for suicide. And they're, again, it could be more subjective, but some of the statistics show that it's really because of the trauma that they experience within their jobs, of what they see, and of the culture that these first responders are supposed to be the solution. They're not supposed to be warriors with problems. They're supposed to be the ones that go out and solve them, not the victim. And we also know that men are less likely than women to seek treatment, even though there are studies that show that mental health really does not discriminate. It's not more in women than men, but men have higher rates of overdoses and completing suicide. So now that we've looked at the prevalence of mental health, we have to understand stigma. And it's not so fact-based and statistics. It's more anecdotal than that. But we know if we just think of our society and how we perceive these things, we know that still talking about a diagnosis or treatment or medication, we know that sometimes people will be hesitant to disclose this, especially with overdose, suicide, and even recovery. That still has some stigma to it. And that might be because these are considered self-made problems to some, and they don't deserve empathy. So dying by suicide is less empathy than dying of cancer. So in order to understand stigma, we have to look at it in a tiered level. So starting internally, we have that self-stigma. Then going outside, we have interpersonal stigma. And then lastly, we have public stigma. So self-stigma includes internalized beliefs that affect our self-esteem and our recovery. So whether that is because of something you've experienced and then hold those truths, or it's just something you think about yourself organically, that self-stigma is there, and it will prevent you from understanding your capabilities. It's very limiting, and it might change how you think about yourself and what you think you deserve and are capable of. So these are just some examples of those thoughts, and that stigma in itself may prevent you from reaching out for help or trying to accomplish goals that you have, or just reaching out to a friend. That interpersonal stigma is the person-to-person interaction that we kind of see in our daily lives. Caregivers experience a lot of this because they have to almost be an advocate constantly for their loved one, that they have to protect and explain when they might be fighting some battles of their own with their loved one, trying to understand and support them through their own struggles. We also see it in bullying and public avoidance. The idea that somebody who has a condition is going to be more violent or is crazy or is not as intelligent, that really leads to a lack of empathy and avoidance in general, for fear of the unknown more than anything. Skip one. And lastly, public stigma. That's that macro society, large, kind of everywhere stigma. And that can be experienced externally, whether that's from a system or that's just kind of a preconceived notion. These are just widely thought stereotypes, and they can affect your life in more ways than one. So for example, employment, while you can't discriminate against somebody who has a condition and can't refuse employment, but if somebody has a legal history from their condition, that will bar them. Or if they have employment, they might be hesitant to disclose anything that they're experiencing or any conditions for fear of perception, that their boss might look at them and think that they're less capable of doing their job, or any negative thing that is associated with them is because of their condition and not because of them as a person, whether that's a sick day or any emotion that's shown. There's just a lot of examples of how this might change how someone looks at you and treats you, and people are hesitant to disclose that because they want to have these safe experiences with housing. They would like access to healthcare, these human rights. So now that we understand a little bit more about what stigma is, we have to look at how it's experienced and what it feels like to have that stigma directed towards them or coming from themselves. So we know that it can diminish your self-confidence and your social interactions, your friendships and your support systems, whether it's because you don't think people will understand you, or because it's exhausting to keep telling your story and you just want to be around people who get it, or because you don't know how to reach out because you have been so isolated and avoidant for so long. We know that it also prevents people from seeking help and support that they need. And whether that's treatment and medication and therapy, or if that's just reaching out and experiencing any help, we know that there's less chances of that because of stigma. And we also know that it limits opportunities in education, employment, and housing. And again, that could be societal, that could be from a certain policy that excludes you, or it could be your own perception of your abilities to exceed. So these are just some examples of how the media has portrayed mental health conditions. So for somebody who has a diagnosis or has been at Trenton Psychiatric, they might internalize these thoughts and look at how society is considering them. And it draws a lot of lines and a lot of barriers. So I'm not sure if you guys are able to see just because we are virtual, so I'll just read the headlines. Roasted nuts, general alarm fire at Trenton Psychiatric. So this is a psychiatric facility that people go to when they need inpatient mental health involuntarily. So instead of the headline speaking to a fire that could have hurt a group of people that were in a facility, in a residential facility, it makes light of it, almost inferring that they wouldn't feel that pain or that fear. And then again, get the violent crazies off of our streets and freed mental patient kills mom. That violent narrative is so consistent, and getting away from that, I think, really reduces that stigma and creates more empathy. So I know that these look like very old clippings, but unfortunately we still see that stigma today. So these are just a few examples of how mental health and substance use is kind of portrayed by society. And again, I don't know if you guys can see, but on the left, we have a popular song called Sweet But Psycho. So this song depicts, or the image of the album depicts a girl in a padded room, inferring that she's in an involuntary setting and having a psychiatric break, and almost trying to make it look sexy and appealing, and really devaluing what that experience is like. And that can be stigmatizing because it's really very much not understanding of what that looks like in reality. And then we have Mariah Carey's Bipolar and Drug Meltdown. It just depicts somebody spinning out of control completely and taking away that human component. And then lastly, Joker, little controversial, but the depiction of mental illness here is just shows that that idea of being violent and being crazy, and more importantly, being irredeemable. That label, this is all this person is, and there's no way that you can possibly recover. So this is kind of the cycle of stigma. It will keep going. We will keep labeling, discriminating, and creating division until somebody breaks that cycle and breaks that stigma. So how do we do that? In Somerset County, we are doing that through our Stigma-Free campaign. So the Board of Chosen Freeholders passed a resolution in 2017 proclaiming that Somerset County is stigma-free. They also pass resolutions for May and September every year, just to bring that awareness to these topics and show that we accept the people in our society, and more importantly, our own county, everybody around us, whether they're our neighbors or our coworkers, they're embedded in our society, and we recognize and we celebrate that. So especially important are our municipalities that have decided to take that to the local level. So that's Bernards Township and North Plainfield. They have both decided that they want in on this campaign and that they want to take that and localize it within their own towns. So what are the benefits of becoming a stigma-free zone or school or municipality or church-based organization? You guys are already doing the first step. You're starting a conversation, even just by being muted throughout all this. You're starting the conversation and spreading awareness, and also reducing the power of those stereotypes. It increases competencies and also increases the perspectives of somebody who's experiencing this. It makes it more relatable and honestly makes it more human. It celebrates our local diversity and kind of everybody who makes up our towns and our workplaces, and it encourages our community cohesion. It encourages pride and respect. So what can we do? How do we get this going? So the first thing that you can do is, it's a step that you can take yourself. It's just to have an affirming attitude that people who have conditions or diagnoses or however they call it, they are valid and they can recover. They're important in our society, and if we took them away, we wouldn't have a society. So you can also change your words and use person-first language. So instead of referring to somebody as a schizophrenic, saying a person who has schizophrenia, just an example, because they are a person first and the schizophrenia is just a part of who they are. And you can also bring some of this training and information on. So we can do stigma-free presentations. There's mental health first aid, which is a great course that explains some of the different mental health conditions in a little bit more information, and then how you can help de-escalate somebody who might be going through a crisis. And we have the question, persuade, refer suicide prevention training. So this explains how to ask that question, and then what to do if somebody does say, yes, I have been thinking about killing myself. You can also view our website and take the pledge. Johanna is going to send out, following this entire presentation, an email, and it will be linked to our website and some resources. And additionally, we are sending you all our Somerset County Stigma-Free Toolkit. So that is a customized tool that you can take and kind of push forward the Stigma-Free initiative. So whether that's your own town or your own group, it shows how we can spread this and what we can do about it to keep it very much alive and get going. And additionally, you can get involved yourself. Please reach out and become a part of us and try to learn more. So in summary, reducing stigma, it just increases access to services. It increases competencies, and it creates a more inclusive and accepting community with pride and more trust. And in Somerset County specifically, we have the opportunity to offer this quality of life and reduce those barriers and that feeling of shame that comes from stigma. And just want to leave you guys with the idea that recovery is possible and probable, and that just because of what you're experiencing or what somebody you love has been experiencing or in the past, it doesn't mean that that's all they are, and that doesn't mean that you can't do anything to help. So I am going to turn it back over. So Mark Williams is one of our wonderful committee members. He is going to facilitate our panel and get the chance for some of our members to discuss what they've gone through and how it relates. So Mark has chaired, he's the reason that North Plainfield themselves is stigma-free. He's behind that. And so thank you so much, Mark, and we appreciate this, and take it away.
All right, Meg, thank you so much. A round of applause. Woo! And thank you so much, Somerset County Human Services Academy Workshop team, and greetings to our guests and panelists. Thank you all who made today possible. As Meg stated, my name is Mark Williams, a retired adult psychiatric nurse. I'm also a North Plainfield Mental Health Stigma-Free Zone campaign ambassador. To get started, I would like to share with you the format for today's panelist discussion. First, each panelist will introduce themselves. After introductions, I will pose several pre-screened questions. The panelists may either choose to respond or pass. During this discussion, Meg will screen questions from our audience. The questions should be posted to Meg specifically. Should questions from the audience be of the same theme, they may be combined for expediency. Okay, so to get started, we're going to have the panelists introduce themselves, and I'm going to call on Oscar first.
Hello everyone, my name is Oscar Rouge. I work as a community health worker for Sioux Falls Health Center, and I'm very excited to be here with you guys.
That's quick, Oscar. Jennifer?
All right. Hi, everybody. My name's Jennifer. I work for Somerset County, and I'm a lifelong resident of Somerset County, but I'm also a person in long-term recovery from substance use disorder and other mental health conditions, and I have been sober since I was 19. I turned 30 last month, so the amount of time I can spend saying I'm a young person in recovery is kind of dwindling, so I will take that as long as I can.
Thank you, Jennifer. Sue?
Hi, my name is Sue Fronti, and I'm the president of Somerset County's affiliate for the National Alliance on Mental Illness, also known as NAMI. I got involved with NAMI in 2005 when my youngest son was hospitalized for his first suicide attempt and diagnosed with the bipolar disorder. There was no education offered to me at that time or how to cure it, and it was then I began my journey with my son reaching out. Unfortunately, over the next 15 years with multiple hospitalizations and treatments, my son and I often felt like we were on the journey alone. He attended appointments and managed his own medications to show himself and everyone that in fact he wasn't sick. And it never crossed his mind, or apparently that of the doctors, that attending these meetings alone was like asking a deaf person to listen or a blind person to read something. No one thought to ask him to bring someone along for support or to help take notes or to share some insights. If he had been diagnosed with cancer, I'm sure this would have all been different. So as a mom and a caregiver, I chose not to share his diagnoses with other people for fear of the stigma it would bring him. I wanted them to see my son first, not the illness. I found when I mentioned to people, they often shut down and stopped the communication. It wasn't like when he was hospitalized, we received casseroles or cards. We were often ignored and communication was stopped. We were both treated as if it didn't deserve the empathy because they were considered to be self-made problems. As caregivers, we provide first-line support without any power or tools. Our insight into the hell of our loved one and their treatment and their diagnosis is very important. And due to the ill-informed translation of the HIPAA rules, we're left out. We're not going to ask anyone to give us information. We would just like to share ours. And that's what I'm here for today. And I really appreciate the group putting this together. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Sue. And last but not least, Ken.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ken Musgrove. I am currently I'm the Director of Recovery Support for Community in Crisis in Bernardsville. I am also a person in long-term recovery. What that looks like for me today is that I have not had a drink or a drug for over 8 years now. I've grown up with family members with mental health conditions. I am the survivor of a parental suicide. My father committed suicide when I was 15. I am also a suicide survivor myself. I did commit suicide. I was just unsuccessful. And that was 9 years ago prior to took me another year to seek treatment. Product of foster care system. So I've got plenty of ACEs in my background. And so mental health has been a condition that I've worked throughout my life, and currently things are well. You know, I'm currently seeing a therapist and medication free, and life is pretty good. It's through active participation in my recovery that I can credit that to. The stigma of growing up with a father who had mental illness, you know, it was back in the mid to late 70s. So it was really a barbaric era of mental health. And it was kind of, you know, tough. He had shock treatments and all sorts of, you know, heavy medication issues. So there was always that stigma and that shame of growing up in a household that had folks with mental health conditions. So that's why I advocate for breaking stigma. So thank you.
Thank you, Ken, for sharing. You trailed off there a little bit at the end in your volume. So just be careful. Just be careful. Okay, here we go. First question. A great deal of what society believes to be true or untrue about people diagnosed with a mental illness often manifests as myths and stereotypes. Myths, misunderstandings, negative stereotypes and attitudes that surround mental illness can often result in stigma, discrimination, and isolation of people with mental health concerns, as well as their families and caregivers. Question to the panel: what stereotypes about mental illness bothers you the most? You can start, anybody can just start.
Yes, I'd like to start with that. The one stereotype that's been bothering me the most is that it's something that Meg actually touched on, the fact that if someone has a mental health condition or an issue that is irreversible and they're just damaged goods. That is the one thing. It's a stereotype that I use myself against people that I knew were diagnosed before I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and PTSD. I used that stereotype. And because I used it before, I realized that I was just not a big mess. It's just that I had some situations that I had to take care of. It was very hurtful to realize that stigma was used, that I used it and that it was used against me now.
Mark, you're muted.
Jennifer, Sue, or Ken?
I can go. So the one that bothers me the most is weakness, that mental illness or substance use disorder, any of these things in the DSM that we get called are weak, because there is something incredibly strong about having to wake up every day with your brain chemistry fighting against you every second of the day. It takes so much strength to even exist sometimes. So I think that is the total opposite of weak, that my brain is going against me at all times and I have to do that in addition to everything else in life. No, weakness is not, yeah, I hate that one.
Sue or Ken?
I just agree with both of them, and that, you know, that is my biggest one, is the irredeemability, that, you know, once person's been diagnosed, that's kind of defines them. And I think that, again, it's been touched on, that people were so much more than a diagnosis.
Sue, is there anything that you wanted to add?
No, that they've covered it very well. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Question number 2, please. It is well documented that mental health stigma is a significant obstacle to help-seeking behavior for people or caregivers in the midst of a mental health crisis. Positive and hopeful attitudes of family, friends, service providers, employers, and other members of the community towards people with mental illness are critical to ensuring quality of life for people with mental illness and supporting recovery. Question: what motivated you or your loved one to seek treatment? Ken, you want to start us off?
I think, unfortunately, for me, myself personally, it was being in crisis. I did not, I tried to deny it as much as possible. I have both substance use and mental health. And for me, it was almost, I was more ready to accept the drug abuse diagnosis than it was a mental health diagnosis, because of the family history. So the only thing that motivated me was crisis, you know, and any time I've ever, prior to recently, had accepted treatment was when I would be hospitalized. So it would always get to that point, unfortunately, because of my own internal stigma, my own, you know, denial. So that's
typically what's known as hitting the bottom, right, Ken?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Jennifer, Sue, Oscar?
I'd like to pick on this one. I think the one thing that got my son, Christopher, and myself to start with the treatment was the education and support I got from NAMI, and finding a community that was having the same conversation with me and was using the same vocabulary and was offering me hope, was highlighting that this was treatable. And they had a list of famous people that were living so successfully with it. So it kind of eliminated a lot of the fear that was connected around it and the ignorance that we were experiencing at the time.
Sue, for those who may not know what NAMI is?
It's the National Alliance on Mental Illness.
Thank you. Oscar or Jennifer?
What prompted me to start seeking treatment was, I used to be a professional ballet dancer, and kind of like I felt like I was a kind of a golden child. You know, everything worked well, and my life was pretty much, you could call it a success. Then when I stopped dancing, things kind of unraveled. And this went on for, I'm sad to say, this went on for decades. It was 19, 20 years of my life practically coming apart, and me just holding on to dear life. It's like I was not in control of it. It's just things seemed to happen, crises seemed to happen, and everything was going wrong. I started working. I met Johanna Moore, and she started guiding me to saying, you know, like, there's something that's going on that, you know, that we need to figure out what's going on with your life. And then I realized, like, okay, so it's not just that I'm a hot mess. It's just there are things that are happening that are not under my control. It's not that I just threw my life away, but that there were things that I could not get together. So yes, it was that. It's just writing that hot mess of a life that I did not want to continue living, and seeking help guided me to realize and being diagnosed, and then I started understanding why everything was happening.
Thank you, Oscar. Jennifer?
So around the time that I was starting to think, okay, maybe I can't really keep going this way, I had an uncle pass away in a car accident. And when, right after his death, we started to learn that he actually had a really bad cocaine habit, to the point where they were hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. And so his family, in addition to taking care of, end of life stuff, had all of this stuff to deal with. And I'll never forget, I went to the wake while I'm dealing with my own stuff and kind of thinking, okay, I think I need treatment. I don't know what it's going to look like. But I'm at the wake and I'm surrounded by my family, and I'm hearing people behind me who are visiting to make sure my uncle is actually dead so that they don't have to collect his debt. And I know I was nowhere near that type of financial trouble, but something about seeing the pain on my family's face, but also hearing behind me how he was going to be remembered. For some reason, the stars aligned and everything just clicked. So it was just like, I can't keep doing what I'm doing. So that was the final push I needed.
Thank you. Meg, I'm going to pause after the next question in case there are questions from the audience. Question number 3, according to research conducted by the National Institute of Health, roughly 1/5 of adults in mental health treatment each year drop out before completing the recommended course of treatment. Reasons most cited for people diagnosed with a serious mental illness are illness denial, alcohol or drug misuse, poor relationships with providers, and medication side effects. Question: did you always stay in treatment? If yes, why? If not, what were some reasons that led you or your loved ones from disconnecting? Jennifer, you want to start us off?
Sure thing. So right after I got sober for the first time, I did try to see a therapist, and I did not have a good experience with her. I think it's, well, I was in college, so she was a student intern, like about to get her master's in counseling. I didn't know at the time that maybe I should see someone actually licensed, but I didn't have a good experience with her. And ever since that time, or from that time until after I graduated, I didn't see a therapist. But, and then I had to go into a mental health IOP when I was 23, so about 2013, because I wasn't taking care of my mental health. And so when my work started loading up in grad school, I had to seek that treatment. And ever since I finished that IOP program, I have been in and out of therapy because I realized I kind of have to keep working on things. But it's unfortunate that it took me that long to find a provider who I mesh with well and who was supportive and knowledgeable, because I think that's half the battle, is finding somebody who fits well with you.
Thank you. Next, anyone?
I did not always stay in treatment. When I was first diagnosed, first of all, it was a shock to me. Like I said, I had tons of stigma against behavioral and mental health issues. So when I was actually given a diagnosis, it was not welcome, number one, was met with a lot of denial from my part and even family members. And the first medication that was given made everything very cloudy, and it was like I was not present. At that time, I was doing a job where I was a head cashier in Home Depot, and I had to deal with a lot of money. I'm not good with money by nature. I don't like I like everyone else to do the bills. So the stress of that situation and going to work and having to know that all that money was gonna be I was gonna be in charge of that, not feeling there, not present. It was one of the things that caused me to stop first, and then panic attacks started to happen, and it was just I had like the freeze or flees response, and I was just disappear. I would run and hide. So yeah, I never really stayed in treatment for a long time with medication, but I was fortunate enough to hit like. Jennifer said earlier, it's like meeting someone that actually fits with you, a therapist that said to me, well, if medication is not the way, let's try something else. Let's just try talk, let's therapy, let's check how you do with everything. And if it comes to a point they say, hey, I need to take something, we'll do that. then that's when I stayed in treatment. So that was the difference. Being given something that they thought would work for me, and in a country, it actually gave me more symptoms and made me have bigger crises. And then someone that actually, because of the diagnosis, which I'm still on and off with that, the diagnosis automatically gave me the medication that was, the go-to thing, and expected it to work. The one person that listened to me was the person that actually cracked the solution open, and I've been doing great since then. Not many crises, and I'm able to actually realize when the symptoms are happening, and with her help, I discovered my tell. And when a panic attack starts to happen, I know what to do now. So that was the secret, listen.
Tools are important.
Yes.
Ken, Sue?
Yeah, basically I did all the things that they said wrong to do. I've done. I've gotten out of treatment and not taking medication, or decided I knew better, and all those things. Currently, I guess it goes back to what Jennifer and Oscar said. I have someone that I trust and I respect, and they listen, and there's someone who's had a long-term experience in recovery. One key thing for me too, being duly diagnosed, is that I had to be abstinent from the drugs and alcohol that I was doing in order to sort out the whole mental health picture, because they were so intermeshed with each other that, it was, that had to be, for me, that had to be dealt with first. And well, I mean, they're both dealt with, but, I definitely had to remove the drugs and the alcohol to kind of figure out what was going on with my mental health. So, and that was, something that I was able to do with this therapist, and I continue to do, mutual support meetings and peer recovery, stuff like that. So that's helped going forward. That's it.
Thank you, Ken. Sue?
I think the hardest thing with Christopher was getting the appointments, finding the right ones that matched. And I had to keep saying to him, just because they come with the title doesn't mean they're going to have the answer. Let's find another one. And so I was very grateful that he allowed me to be a part of that. But he did manage his own meds, very much in an effort to prove that he could and that he wasn't ill. And what upset me was there were times when he would leave one intake facility or hospital and go to another, and the plan wasn't followed. I mean, there was a case where he was double dosed once, and then I was fighting between, as a caregiver, has he started using again because he also was dual diagnosed? Or was it the medication? And God bless him that he kept his own card of medical medications that I was able to call up and verify through the current nurse that that he was being double dosed, that he was being assigned the same medication different times of the day. There hadn't been a follow-up, and that often he would then stop treatment, obviously, because of the side effects of the medication. And it was really hard for him.
Yeah, I think denial is a tough one to get over, and also having a team around you and people that you trust in your therapist, and that you have a team around you to help manage you managing your own health and wellness. Thank you guys for sharing. Meg, you got a question from the audience?
I do have a question. Thank you, Mark. And I'm simply going in the order that they came in. So the question is, what one experience or more has given you the belief and strength to overcome stigma in your own journey or the journey of your loved one? That's a thinker.
Yes.
I want to say I work with caregivers every day through NAMI. And the one thing that we try to emphasize to them in education is that this is something that's being done to your loved one. It's not something your loved one is doing to you. So getting that awareness that this is an illness, this isn't something they're intentionally doing to make your life miserable as a caregiver, has helped caregivers become more proactive and has helped us to continue to educate our loved one. Let us help you out. This is hell that you're walking through. Let us be a part of your team. And I think that's helped us get through the stigma of wanting to continue in the education.
I had one event where, like you say, you guys are mentioning teams, and it's just really funny. It can be a team, it can be your family. I have a very wonderful, supportive, put together sister, and also she was kind enough to grant me the freedom to control my own life and try to be there, but be very stern and verbal about situations where I was being out of control. And it called attention to the fact that I realized it made me realize that I didn't know when I was out of control. And it was just because I had a caring, watchful eyes letting me know, hey. And I think those were her words were, you're going too far. It's too much. You need to put it together. And it made me realize, because it's someone that I trust absolutely. So that was the one thing.
I can go. I don't know if it was one experience, it was more of a process, but, and I know my supervisors are on this call, so hi everyone, you're involved in the story. But I think it was a huge realization for me when I learned that I could use my recovery in a professional setting, and it's why I am good at what I do, and how I'm helping people through what I've gone through, and just the unconditional acceptance I've received since I've decided to be public with this at work. Because I think, I even though I've been sober 11 years, I wasn't really out with it until like 3 years ago. And it's mostly because my work environment was so welcoming that I was like, oh, I can be this person professionally, but also in recovery. It's not gonna hold back where I'm going with my career. So for some reason, that was just really monumental for me in realizing, all right, I think I got this, I'm good. So that was helpful.
And I'll jump in. For me, since so much of my stigma is internalized, I think consistency over time and being able to navigate ups and downs and to be honest about what's going on and be able to get through that, that's really helped me to, successfully navigate my mental health, but also to reduce the stigma that, again, that irredeemability, that, I am redeemable, and that others can see that, be that example. So.
Go ahead, Meg, take another one.
Sorry, lost the mute button. So this is not really a question for any panelists in general, but it's just about, says we see more and more young children present with anxiety and depression. What role do you think schools have to help our students and parents? And then just piggybacking off that, maybe answer, what do you think would have helped you when you were younger? Let's go with that.
I wanna go with that, because I was a terror when I was a kid, and it was just hyperactive, inquisitive, highly intelligent, so they thought, or not, but I'm extremely fearful. I come from a home where there was violence induced by alcohol, and it was a situation where you become very fearful and very strong at the same time. In situations where you are outside, you can be very upfront, outgoing, the life of the party. But then when the situation becomes or something triggers your fear, you're paralyzed and you have anxiety and you cannot function. That's real for kids. That happens. That's something that teachers could be the best help you can get. Teachers are the ones that actually can notice when a kid is just not a bad kid. A kid maybe is not just hyperactive, but maybe he's not a bully. Maybe he's just reflecting on what's happening in his house. Maybe he wants to be the one in power this time, not the one the power is being imposed to on this time. So teachers, I think teachers and schools are a huge tool. And I think that the conversation about mental health and behavioral health should be present and with your young kids. It will help identify people with issues. It will start the treatment early. It won't have to be like people like me that went, or like pretty much everybody in the panel that went through half a life having to deal with these situations. If early identification of everyone's situation could be there, maybe lives can be different. You know, like people can make these discoveries as soon as they are diagnosed, or as soon as someone realizes, we can make progress. So kids are resilient, so maybe they'll grow up and not have to deal with any of that.
Yeah, Oscar really hit the nail on the head with teachers, because more than anyone in the school, you see the kids every single day. So after maybe even like a month of the school year, you kind of have a general idea of who they are, what their baseline is. And the second that deviates, you know something's up. And I think I had a teacher in 7th grade who I think really changed my life. And I still don't know what I did. Apparently, I responded very snappy and snarky to her. My mom always, chastises me for that. I don't remember what I said. But for some reason, my teacher was like, whoa, that is not Jen. I don't know what's going on. And I forget the actual chain of command, but she went to guidance and it got to my mom and something. But that was like the first time that the school was involved, because they knew something was up somehow. And I often wonder what it would have been like if, I was at that middle school and I was on the radar, but then when I went to the high school, it was so big, I slipped under the radar. And part of me will always wonder, like, if I had teachers like that who were that observant in high school and that willing to reach out to my parents and reach out to guidance back then, I wonder like how much time I could have saved on working on my career and working on this and that, rather than struggling the whole time. But yeah, the teacher observance is huge here.
I want to jump in on what Jennifer also just said and expand that a little further, not only from the teachers, but if we can get this education in at a younger age and start using some common vocabulary like anxiety, or, are you nervous before a test? That feeling you get in your stomach? What do we call that? How many have felt it? And make it more of a conversation so even peers know that somebody's having a problem, making them take their eyes off the iPads and look around the room and notice if John's, crying today or sitting in isolation, or, teaching them the tools for noticing sadness, or, all those words. If we start that talking earlier, the students notice among themselves as well, but I think they're also dealing with the stigma in the field that someone's going to make a comment or criticize them. But if this is something happening in our health classes where we're talking about, all these things coming up now more than ever with all the little ones, even at home, with the isolation and the loneliness and the sadness, give them the words and talk about it. So, it's not just the teachers, it can be peers sitting in the classroom that can help.
True. I'll just jump in. I mean, I'm from the dark ages of, I'll give you something to cry about, and it's will break your bones, and men don't cry, and all that stuff. And I was a sensitive little boy, and I had, no outlet for it. So I think we've come a long way, but I still think there's, a long way to go with languaging and even acceptance. Like, my generation, and myself included, that whole thing that, sticks and words do hurt, and words do have an impact, and that, the language that we use is important. So, yeah, I mean, so that's where, parochial school, the whole 9 yards. So my schooling, I got a good education, but there was a lot of other stuff that came along with it. So, but yeah, so I think the languaging is important, and important at, at an early age and going forward. So thank you.
Thank you all. I'd just like to piggyback a little bit on what Jennifer said, and imagine if your parents were poor single, and had a job that they couldn't take off during the day to go to your school and meet with your teacher or your guidance counselor. Okay, question number 4. Stigmatizing attitudes are not uncommon among mental health professionals who may be less than optimistic about outcomes for people with long-term mental health problems. These perceptions are probably related to the professionals' experiences, such as those working in the public sector, providing care for persons served in the most chronic and persistent phases of mental illness. Question, did you perceive a less than optimistic attitude toward yourself or your loved one for an optimal outcome from treatment related to a serious and persistent mental health diagnosis?
I did perceive that I actually, some of the treatments that I left, that the times that I fell out of care were caused by exactly that. A very knowledgeable but close-minded approach to who I was and what would work for me. And I'm talking about medication and not really understanding that. So that was like that was the thing. It was a negative approach. It's like, okay, if you're not going to take medication, then you're going to be out of care, or you're not going to get any better, or this is what you need to do. You have to take your pills, without really taking the time to really see whether, because yes, nobody wants to take pills. Nobody wants to take pills that change the way you feel, that change the way you interact with people, that change the way that you feel you are you. So that's a rule. I think that I think that providers should know that already. You don't need to tell us that you have to take the medication. Yeah, we're there, but listen. Just listen to the person. Listen. Sometimes our life is not taken into consideration. You know, I teach ballet and I work. I have a separate job, so I would come to class and try to come up with an exercise. And, you know, I'm an excellent teacher, and it would just not happen. And once I come back to the same point again. One person that said, hey, you know, let's do something different. That was the negative approach and stigmatizing, because if you're not on meds, then you're not going to get better.
I want to jump in. Christopher, I had been in and out, as you guys, so many different ones. And I remember right after his first suicide attempt, when we went, after we were there, the doctor just looked at him and said, you know, didn't you ever think about how this was going to affect your family? And I mean, I gave a lame excuse for, we had another appointment I had misscheduled and we left. You know, and I said to Chris, we're going to find another one. This one's not getting it. And the next time we went, I remember a doctor sitting there the whole time with his head on his laptop. And when he finally did ask a question, he asked it to me. And he asked how Chris was doing. And I said, he's sitting right there. Like maybe you didn't notice because, and so ask him please. On a good note though, we did have one which not only invited Chris at the time, but his wife and myself. And after talking to Chris, she asked his permission to speak with us. And then she asked each of us how we were interpreting how he was doing. He felt so validated and we felt so validated because we were the ones that were seeing the 24/7. So there's so many different ones. You just have to keep going till you find the right one.
I agree with both of you. I also wish I knew back then that it's okay if you don't mesh well with the first person you see. You don't have to, and you can always try other things. It didn't occur to me. But the therapist I talked about seeing in college, one of the things she was really hardcore about for me, and maybe it's because she didn't have the training in substance use disorder, but it was almost like she was adamant that I would not get better if I did not go to 12-step meetings. And those of you who know me know that those just don't work for me. I think they're great for other people. It's just not my thing. And sometimes I want to write like a petty email to her and be like, listen, I'm 11 years sober. I still didn't go to any. I'm good. But like, she just didn't involve me in my own recovery planning. And it was kind of like, well, why are you making these decisions for me? I will try them out for you. But if they're not sitting well with me, just allow that. So she made me feel like truly, just because I didn't go to them, I was doomed to fail. And I kind of had that over me the whole time until I went into treatment again. I was just like, oh, you mean I didn't have to do that and I'm fine? Whoa, okay. So, yeah.
Ken?
I'll be the contrarian. I mean, I guess the healthcare providers were always trying to help me, and I was the belligerent one. So I was the one that was not accepting their help. So that, you know, that's on me. What I did experience some of the less than optimal outcomes was from family members, and you know, and oftentimes growing up, when I would misbehave, I would hear, "You're going to turn out just like your father. You're going to turn out just like your older brother who had mental health issues." And so to me, I internalized that, and then probably made me act out even more. You know, it was like, okay, well, if you want to see, you know, that's what you think, that's the way you think I'm going to turn out, then that's what how I'm going to turn out. So, so yeah, I didn't get it so much from the professionals, but more so from family members. And when they were saying it, they were kind of saying it to try and help me. They were trying to tell me that, you know, but it was not very helpful.
Thank you, everybody. No one wants to hear they have something wrong with their mind. Tell me I have hypertension. Tell me I have diabetes. Tell me I need root canal. Any host of normal, air quotes, medical problems. Having a mental health diagnosis can be one of the most disruptive of life's challenges. Question: what is the biggest consequence for you or your loved one having a mental health diagnosis? Anyone can start, please.
Yeah, I'll start. I was, first of all, very baffled because I came face to face with the amount of stigma I've been applying to mental health illness. And but it was enlightening because I realized that some of the situations I lived as a child and the ruined relationship with one of my parents because of the alcohol and the violence and seeing all things that I saw, I realized it's like maybe that wasn't just that it was a monster. Maybe it's just that someone that was hurting and someone that was sick. Because I realized then that a lot of the things that I was doing, I knew I was hurting people. I knew I was, you know, I will, you know, self-medication, you know, dangerous behavior, irresponsibility. I knew I was hurting the people in my life because my family is very close. But I never did it on purpose. I just could not control what was happening. I was running from something, and then I realized it healed my relationship with my parent, because I thought, hey, you know, it's something that is not done to me. It was something that he was going through, and we were just part of the consequences of what he was going through. It was enlightening, and it actually was a great thing for me. I understood a lot of my life in that moment.
Ken, Jennifer, Sue?
I'll jump in. So I think it's already been mentioned. I mean, one of the biggest things is that I've got to proactively manage my health every day, and do certain things that to make sure that I stay in balance. And then there are times, even when I do all those things, that I still I'm off the beam. So you know, it's that being ever vigilant, you know, having to constantly, you know, take care of myself and do those things to make sure that I'm healthy. And that's, you know, basically, you know, that's what I have to do in order to stay healthy. But it's a consequence of the diagnosis, and in order to be productive.
Yeah, I'll chime in because Ken really said what I was going to say, is that this is an everyday thing. You don't really get to take days off from working on your recovery. like, it was a really tough pill for me to swallow when I realized that the rest of my life can never be the same after this. Having to end friendships that were not good for my recovery, that's always a hard thing to do. Especially when, you know, years later, the friends that you had to cut ties with end up passing away, and then there's all this guilt roaming in. So that's a very hard thing to do. But just realizing that, you know, not only do I have this thing I have to fight every day, but now I have to change the rest of my life around this to protect myself and not always like in a way that I kind of want to, was really hard. So I think that was the biggest thing, was like, oh, damn, like this is not just the diagnosis is permanent, but me having to work on it every day is also permanent. That's difficult.
I want to say that as a caregiver, and in my case, as a mom, it's learning to give up some of the dreams or hopes that you have for your child as you thought their life was going to go. And then coming on board with, now that they've been changed, how do I get in to finding out and giving him the hope that his life is going to be successful. So you're always in the middle, trying to be empathetic towards what he's going through, and you go through your own pain and your own loss and misery, and you lose friends as well, because I couldn't share a lot of what he was going through and still remain hopeful and positive for him, because it wasn't always received the same way at the other side, and I couldn't keep balancing everybody else's comments and then still turn around and support him. So I felt very much as a caregiver stuck in between two worlds, isolated as well.
Thank you all. And I'm going to move to a specific question that I wanted to address to Oscar. Disparities in mental health services use can be partially attributable to a lack of understanding by healthcare professionals of the historical experiences of racial and ethnic minorities, stigma of mental illness among minority groups, and cultural presentations of symptoms, among others. Question: what would you want human services professionals to know about the importance of cultural competency in the treatment of racial and ethnic minorities? I'm going to ask Oscar first, and then of course anyone can chime in of the other panelists.
Well, I think that is of the utmost important. If you're not cultural competent when it comes to, all right, I'm gonna speak from my experience. I am Latino, I am Colombian, I'm South American, and I grew up in a world where people will rather say that someone was a drunk, that they like to drink, or anything like that, other than saying that they had someone with a mental health condition or anything like that. That was accompanied with a lot of shame, a lot of denial. People that were mentally ill were put in the back room and never let out so that people would not see them. If someone came over, you tuck them in and lock them up and try to give them something to eat so they don't make the weird noises. It's just something that the culture is now. Latin Americans, and well, I'm Colombian, so Colombians value your presentation, value the way that you read to the people that are talking to you. They value the sense of strength and dignity. Unfortunately, having mental health conditions, you are seen in situations that are not very dignified. You are seen in situations that you cannot be proud of it, that your family will not be very proud of seeing. So if you understand that, you understand when someone is going to be told that you have a mental health condition, maybe this is what's wrong with you or something like that, it's just going to be immediately, no, I'd rather be dead. You know, like you said, you'd rather get a tooth pulled out than being told that you have a mental health condition. That goes 10 times more. If you add to that the educational level, and if we talk about, I work in a FQNI, a federally funded clinic, and the group of people that we work with is they're not very educated. They're immigrants that are working. You know, they're people that don't have a lot of education, if you come at them with diagnosis, it's just gonna, what you're telling them is that they're shameful, that there's something to be embarrassed about, that there's something that's damaged, that there's something that needs to be hidden in the back, because that's what we bring. You know, I was a dancer. I was successful. I had an education. I travel. And when that was mentioned to me, I threw all those locks in front of my face. I was like, it's not gonna happen. So if you come to the appointment with that in mind, if you have the idea that you're gonna diagnose somebody, just keep in mind what that means to that person and how it's gonna affect them, because that will graduate the level of reception and how it's going to affect them. How, if it's going to be like my response was flee, denial, and try to numb it, and it's not happening, or it's going to be something that they're going to first understand and try to work with and realize that they're not lost, that they're not damaged goods. Is of the utmost important, in my opinion. I think that's it.
Thank you, Oscar.
You're welcome.
Jennifer, Sue, Ken?
I guess I would say that we've been taught for a very long time to imagine what other people go through and to put ourselves in other people's shoes, which I think is important. But when it comes to different racial or ethnic groups that are not your own, you can't always imagine what they go through. And so you really have to take their word for it and treat them as experts in their own experiences. Because I could read all the books in the world about what it's like to be a man of color, and I will still not know it because I haven't been in that life. So really just allowing people to set the tone for that discussion, and incorporating it and always reincorporating it. Just, you know, don't ask one question about what it's like to be them and then never visit it again. It's always going to be a part of who they are. So it should be a part of your work with people as well.
Well said. Sue, Ken?
I'll just say that from a cultural competency standpoint, again, you know, being open to people from all backgrounds, but I can also say from a white male, you know, I was a middle manager, you know, I was making 6 figures a year, and to have a mental health issue, that too was stigmatizing. That I did not want to admit that I had, you know, I needed help, you know, because here I was, I'm managing this business, yet I can't manage my own emotions, my own thoughts, my own feelings. And so that too is you know, there's a stigma there, and the numbers show it, that, you know, males are less likely to seek treatment for mental health conditions than others. So so yeah, just from my own perspective, but again, in the treatment field, you know, it's my philosophy is multiple pathways, and you know, doors open to everyone. So thank you.
Sue?
I think they pretty much said it all.
Okay. Meg, thank you all. Meg, you have a question from the audience.
That's actually very funny. The next question was about the perception of stigma within gender. So Ken really just jumped on that. So it was just a question, why do you think that there's more stigma towards men? There's a lot of questions, but I think that we'll stick with that just because we are time sensitive. So if somebody wanted to add any more about that, if not, then Mark, bring us home.
Okay.
Well, I think Ken said it very well. But the one thing that I would like to add, that is just because that is guided by gender discrimination. What is expected of a man, and this imagine they say that Latinos are way more machist and chauvinistic than anyone else in cultures where the male is the leader and the head. You're expected to be the strong one. You're expected to be the one that has it all together. You're expected to be the leader. Your word is law in these family households. So if come to a person that, yes, with all the problems, whatever it is, that's going to be hard for someone to accept. You know, dealing with someone that is used to being the law, used to being the leader, and tell that person that it's not going to be very well received. That's why the stigma goes that way, Harry, with men, I think, also.
Thank you, Oscar.
Ken, Sue?
I'm good. No. Well, I mean, when it is spoken so well, I'm not going to elaborate unless I need to.
Okay, okay. I want to thank the panel for sharing and disclosing your personal stories. Thank you so much. And we do want the audience to have something to walk away with. We do want them to have a takeaway. So I'm going to ask the final question. What is the one step that can be taken today that could reduce stigma towards mental health and substance use disorders in your experiences, in your opinion?
Okay, I'll kick that one off. And I wrote it down so I could say it clearly. Mental health affects everyone and should be a part of every intake and interview and medical exam. Words like stress and depression and anxiety should be introduced into every conversation to reduce its sting and to emphasize its power to weaken our physical health when it's left unattended. I believe the more education and conversation we have about mental health and how our brain processes our world with all its glories and difficulties, the more normal people will feel when they experience something, and they'll be more willing to share. Fear and stigma will lose its sting, and empathy and understanding will begin.
That's beautiful.
Thank you, Sue.
I'm going to say, you know, if everyone could go back to where they work and look at the language that's used in the literature that's produced by where you work, and kind of go through it and see where, because so much of it still says substance abuse, and we still use a lot of archaic language even today. And you know, that we've made a lot of progress, but there's still a lot that can be done, and a lot, you know, the more we change that language, it makes it more acceptable and less stigmatizing, I think. So, and that's something that's very easily doable, and if we all just kind of are cognizant of the words that we use.
Thank you, Ken.
I'd like to go back to education. I think that we all in school and high school, we do biology, we study muscles, we get tested on how many bones certain body part has. I don't remember ever having had a class in which the effect of the chemicals in our brain has on your behavior, what can cause certain thing. And come on, it's like I see it like if we're training people to drive a car, we're teaching them a lot about the wheels, we're teaching them a lot about anything, but we're not teaching them about the engine and how it goes, you know, what makes it work. If our brain is not functioning well, what else is going to function well? You know what I mean? I think it's just education. If we bring that conversation into the classroom, first of all, we avoid name calling, we avoid the stigma that we all grew up with. And because kids are very smart, kids are smart enough to know that the chemicals in your brain are off. One can cause you to be too depressed, one can cause you to be hyper, one can cause you to be whatever. That needs to be included. That needs to be included in curriculum so everybody knows. The kids know. If the kids know, the adults will know.
Very nice. I think, you know, my answer would be so similar to my fellow panelists. And I think since our audience is mostly human service professionals, I also think it's really important the way that we greet people when they come into our office for the first time or interact with them over the phone for the first time is really important. And I think studies have shown that if you have a negative experience on the phone the first time you're trying to access treatment, you won't call again for maybe months or if not years. I forget what the actual figure is. So in addition to education and changing our language, we also just need to be nice to people. Like I've worked in medical settings where we know that there's a patient coming in who is just erratic and difficult to work with, but we don't know what they're going through. So just greeting them, hi, how are you? It's so nice to see you. Because I think a lot of self-stigma or just stigma in general is because we don't feel like we belong anywhere. So maybe just being that one person who makes us feel welcome, I think that can go a long way.
Thank you so much, panelists. A round of applause, clap, clap, clap. And Meg, I hand it back off to you with 2 minutes to go.
We can do it. Well, thank you all so much. I really appreciate all the contributions. and all the perspective shifts that hopefully will be taken away from this. So thank you again, everybody, for coming and giving us your Friday afternoon. Even though it's quarantine, it's still a Friday afternoon. So we appreciate it. And look out in your emails. You will receive some resources from Johanna, mental health resources and substance use providers in the county, as well as links to our stigma-free page, our toolkit, and a survey we would appreciate you to fill out after. So thank you to our panelists, our facilitator, and to our audience of all of our partners and provider organizations. I hope everybody has a great day.
Thank you.
Great job, Meg. Great job, Mark.
Thank you, everyone. It was wonderful.
Are we debriefing or are we done for the day?
What are you guys doing?
Great job. Thank you. Really well presented.